family. Welcome to the ELI New York Focused Grammar Lesson Series. My name is Teacher Robert, and I am one special teacher at the English Language Institute at the College of Staten Island. I'm from New York. I am in New York on this beautiful day, and I thank you all for joining us today. Today, yes, we're going to learn about the second condition. Ooh-wee! It's actually like my favorite because it's about, well, I'll tell you what it's about. Let's get started, okay? So first, for the second conditionals, let's change this up so we can get a look at a little slide action. So first we have to ask ourselves, well, what are conditionals? Because like we said, we're talking about the second. What happened to the first? What's the first about? And how many conditionals are there? Since there's a number of them, right? So conditionals are used to express a hypothetical situation, right? So a hypothetical situation, because we have to know what hypothetical means, right? So a hypothetical situation is when you don't know if something will happen or not. So you make a guess about what the result might be. Now, the interesting part is there are 4 conditional patterns in the English language, and they usually involve an if clause. And we're going to go through how to use the if clause in the second conditional so it's all good, right? So this lesson, of course, is going to focus on the second conditional, also known as the unreal conditional. So then what is the second conditional? Well, the second conditional shows an unlikely or impossible outcome that would not happen in most cases. Well, unless a specific condition was somehow met, right? And that's why I like it, because it gives you imagination, vision, possibility, the possibility of impossibility, which I think is kind of awesome. So let's look at the second conditional used in a sentence, which was actually cool that it was put in the ad for the class, which is cool. So the way we use it in the sentence, the way we use the second conditional in the sentence format is if plus simple past. Now this is important, and we're going to review this. If plus simple past, comma, would plus base verb. And that comma comes in handy later, okay? Now, before we get started, I'd like to add, well, we already got started, but as we continue, if there are any students that want to tell us where you're from, so we can shout out your country, shout you out personally, and I could give you a New York shout out. Ooh-wee! Because that's how we do. All right, so let's go through some tips, okay, about using the second conditional. So there's tip number 1, which means they're going to be numbered, right? So tip number 1, the second conditional uses the verb in the if clause, which is a simple past verb, and uses the verb in the main clause with would plus the base form of the verb. Let's look at this, right? A sentence can begin with either clause because we're breaking it up in the clauses, right? So the meaning won't change whether you switch the clauses or anything. And we're going to go through that. We'll see an example. Oh, you can see it right there. It's right at the bottom, right? But one thing to remember, a sentence that begins with an if clause is always followed by a comma. Let's look at some examples. If they had more money, they would buy a plane ticket to New York. But because it started with an if clause, there's a comma. So let's switch it. Let's put the other clause in front, the would clause, I guess we'd call it. They would buy a ticket to New York if they had more money. Now, they mean exactly the same thing, but what's important is if you start the sentence with the if clause, you have to add that comma, okay? Just remember that. Commas are important, especially for grammar, okay? So the be verb in the conditional sentence is always were. Now, this is amazing, and it blows a lot of people's minds because we've all known about how to use the different be verb with the different subjects, right? But not this time. The be verb in conditional sentences is always were, not was, for all subjects. It's easier to say it this way because it's better for grammar. Okay, so here's some examples, right? If I were a New Yorker, I would go shopping every day. If Juan were a pilot, he would fly to New York. Okay? Always use were when using the second conditional. And it doesn't matter like if it's he, she, and all that good stuff. All it matters is remember be verb and were. Okay? So, if you now this is another tip. This is tip number 3. So we had tip 1, tip 2, and now we're on for tip 3, right? The be verb in the conditional, right? Now that was tip 2. Tip 3, if your meaning is can, always use could in the second conditional. Okay? Let's look at some examples. Oh, wow, look at that Coney Island beach. It's like beach weather outside in New York right now. All right, so here are the examples for could. If he were in New York, he could visit the College of Staten Island, and I hope you do. Another way of saying it is, we could go to the beach in Coney Island if it were warmer today. I think it is warmer today, but it's cool. So you have pictures of the College of Staten Island, pictures of the nice Coney Island beaches with Nathan's famous Franks, which is really popular in Coney Island and actually popular in New York. And they actually taste really, really good. Oh, and the reason why they have Nathan's famous Franks there is because, of course, oh, wait, let's wait for a New York moment, okay? We'll wait for the New York moment. It's coming soon. So the next slide I want to tell you about is this. Now, this slide, I had to break it up so that we could all see it together. So let's break down the second conditionals, and we're going to break it down into the sentence, what the condition is, what the outcome is, and what the explanation is. This is best so that you can actually get a very vivid idea of what it means. So let's look at our first 2 examples. If we won the lottery, we would travel to New York. Flipping it, we would travel to New York if we won the lottery. Note, which sentence uses the comma? Tip number 1, if the sentence starts with if, you put the comma there. Always remember that. So what's the condition? The condition of the sentence is winning the lottery. Oh, I wish I could win. Look at all those nice lotto tickets that we can play. Powerball, take 5, pick 10, win 4, the mega. Yes. Now, what's the outcome? You win the lottery, traveling to New York, right? And what's the explanation? Why is this a conditional? Why is this a second conditional specifically? Well, winning the lottery is rare. So this is very unlikely. So remember that the second conditional is either unlikely or impossible. Okay? So let's go through the next sentence, which will talk about impossible and more unlikely. So the first group says, if I had wings, I would fly to Staten Island. It's probably be faster, right? So I would fly to Staten Island if I had wings. Okay, remember the comma. Condition, having wings. But I want wings. As long as they're not my arms. If they're in my back, then that's cool. I still want my fingers and stuff. So the outcome is flying to Staten Island. And the explanation, I don't have wings. So this situation is impossible. Okay? The next one is, if Lisa lived near Coney Island, she would learn to surf. And flipping it, Lisa would learn to surf if she lived near Coney Island. So the condition is living near Coney Island. The outcome is learning to surf. And the explanation, she doesn't live near Coney Island now. So this is unlikely. All right, we're going to have to do, what do we call it in football, an audible. An audible New York moment! All right, why do we have this? Coney Island with the hot dog. I have to explain it. It's right there, right? Yeah. All right. On Coney Island, every year, okay, except probably this year, but every other year, for decades, they have had the hot dog eating contest where people just gulp down hot dogs with like usually they take the hot dog, they dip it in some kind of liquid and just swallow it. Now, I'm a big dude and I like to eat, but I would never join that contest. I don't think I could keep the hot dogs down, but they are usually slim champions that win the hot dog eating contest in Staten Island. And the reason why I get excited for it is actually sometimes my parents and I will watch it as like an event. Sometimes we'll even have hot dogs ourselves while we're watching it. Okay, sometimes hamburgers too. But yeah, that's what makes Coney Island popular, along with the famous Ferris wheel. But yeah, the hot dog eating contest makes Coney Island really, really awesome. All right, so let's go through the next one. So, if my grandparents were young again and in Manhattan, they would do things differently. My grandparents would do things differently if they were young again and in Manhattan. For this case, remember tip number 2. Use were, not was, in the subject, no matter if the subject is single or if the subject is plural. So what's the condition in this sentence? Being young again. What's the outcome? Living life in Manhattan a different way or in a different way. And what's the explanation? Well, we can't go back in time. Grandparents can't go back in time. So this is utterly impossible, which of course makes it a second conditional. All right. So remember, unreal, impossible, second conditional. Okay. Now here we go. So what do we get from this? I wanted to break down different types of sentences. So let's look at how to make the second conditional a negative sentence. Okay. An example. I would never go to New York if I were a Bostonian. If I were a Bostonian, I would never go to New York. So here goes our next New York moment. I love that. So I'm from New York. I'm a New Yorker. I'm not a Bostonian because I do not live in Boston. So this is impossible. Okay? So Bostonians are from Boston. New Yorkers are from New York. Awesome, isn't it? Now, why? Why would I say this? Well, that comes the New York moment that's coming up, which is very specific and very awesome. All right. I get a lot of students and they come to New York, but they want to explore other cities. And I say, why do you want to do something like that? But I understand. You're in a new country, right? So a city they like visiting is Boston. And they never understood why when they say Boston, I go, Boston. All right. So there's a rivalry between Boston and New York, okay? So the real New York moment is the city rivalry between the people in New York and the people of Boston. Now, how did this rivalry begin? Why is there this Boston versus New York? And no, it's not the different accents. This rivalry began between New York and Boston teams. Oh, hey, teacher, what's a rivalry? Well, simple. A rivalry is a competition for the same objective. So what objective is this rivalry about, right? So the rivalry between New York and Boston occurred because of baseball. And it all happened because a baseball player, pretty famous if you like baseball, his name was Babe Ruth. And he was transferred from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees. And as the New York Yankees went up, the Boston Red Sox went down for decades. Now they're actually all right. So, of course, the fans being loyal to their baseball team in their city expand the rivalry from baseball to the actual people living in the city. So that's a personal rivalry. Of course, it's all in jest. It's all, people aren't going to see someone with a Boston hat and go boo. Okay, we might do that in New York, but but it's not like personal. It's just nice little rivalry, nice little competition. So next slide. How do we use the second conditional in a sentence, in a question? So we have a normal sentence, we have the negative, and now we're going to go through in a question. So we always have to remember the form doesn't change. If plus past simple, comma, would plus base verb. Let's look at some question examples. What would you do in New York if you had $1 billion? $1 billion, right? What New York borough would you visit if you could fly? These are both questions, and it doesn't change. The only thing you have to remember is if you're talking about can, you use could, right? And you usually start it with the would clause, right? Simple, nothing special, but it's always good to rehearse everything when you're talking about grammar. Why? Because English grammar is tricky sometimes and it can throw a few curveballs. So the best ammunition is to have the most ammunition in your grammar arsenal. Okay, that sounded a little bit. I play a lot of video games, so it's all right. So let's look at some mistakes that we do not want to make when using the second conditional. Why? Because these are common mistakes. First one, or actually, I think this is the last one because we don't have numbers, right? Okay, good. So the example is this. If I would have a brother, we would visit New York. Well, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this is incorrect. Why? Because in the second conditional, we must always use the past simple. Remember the format, okay? How would we correct this sentence? Well, if I had past simple, a brother, we would visit New York, okay? So always make sure use the past simple and we'll be fine together, right? We'll still be friends. So let's review this one, okay? Second conditional. Let's go through all the tips and everything we must remember for this remarkable grammar section. Remember, the second conditional format, if plus past simple, comma, would plus base verb. You can have either clause, but let's look at this. A second conditional sentence that begins with an if clause is followed by a comma. Remember, you can start the second conditional with the if clause or the would clause, and you can switch it. Third thing to remember, can equals could. If your meaning is can, always use could in the second conditional. Number 4, for review, remember the if plus were rule. And this is important to really remember, okay, when using the second conditional. After if, use were, not was. And it doesn't matter if the subject is single or plural. If I were, if you were, if he, she were, if it were, if they were. When using the second conditional, always use were. And number 5, always remember, use the simple past, or actually use the past simple, okay, when using the second conditional. And guess what? That's the gist of using the second conditional. We're all we've got. So let's go through this. If you have any questions, okay? Again, my name is Teacher Robert, one special teacher at the English Language Institute at the College of Staten Island. You can join the ELI program and study with us. The link is in the description below. Now, questions about anything? New York, second conditionals, life, death, the meaning of the universe and everything, what books I like to read, what movies I like to see. All these answers could be yours, ladies and gentlemen. But, you know, do we have any students telling us where they're from so we can give a shout out? Oh, let's go look at the chat. Okay, any cities out there? Anyone from Peru, Brazil, Anyone from Mexico, Japan, Korea, Amsterdam, New Zealand? Yeah, why not? All right. So, any questions you have about learning English, any questions you have about pronunciation, about the second conditional, and any question you have about actually joining us in the ELI program, now is the time to shine. And that's about it. Let's lock and load.
Robert, do we say if I was you or if I were you?
If I were, always use were when using the second conditional. When using the second conditional. If I were. And that's something that people have to get used to because it's been drilled in I was, he, she, and all that stuff. No, learning when to use was and when to use were is like banged in the student's head. But in the second conditional, you're just given the freedom to remember one thing. If I were, if they were.
Okay.
I like the
Thank you,
second
Robert.
conditional. It's awesome.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody for watching the class today. I just want to say again, like Robert said, join us for our online program, and I'll just leave Robert to say goodbye to everybody. Goodbye from New York now, from on my side.
All right, so on this lovely day, oh my gosh, I am going outside after this. On this lovely day, I'd like to wish you all peace, happiness, stay safe, all that good stuff. Give you all my love. Come back, see us next week. We'll be here. All right. Peace from New York. Bye. Peace.